So welcome again, everyone, to our Goose webinar series. Today we have Dr. Ivanka Barzashka. She is the manager, director, and founder of the Wargaming Network and a researcher at the Center of Science and Security Studies at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Her work spans fundamental and applied wargaming research, focusing on strategic decision-making, strategy development, and net assessment. Her educational background is in physics and international relations, and has expertise in disruptive technologies, gray zone crises, and nuclear conflicts. Goose is very happy and honored to have her here today. So Ivanka, I hand it over to you and your wonderful presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Sebastian. And it's really a pleasure to join you here today. And I just recall the first time we engaged was after you published your article on building the pipeline of wargaming talent and publishing that in War on the Rocks. So I'd like to commend you for your leadership and initiatives to achieve this this vision with the Georgetown Wargaming Society and with some of the other activities that you've had underway. So it's really a pleasure to be here with your audience of Georgetown students, and I see some colleagues as well popping up on the screen. So I am the managing director of the King's Wargaming Network. Now, in that role, I oversee the strategic direction of the Wargaming Network. And the purpose of the talk today is to share more about the vision of establishing wargaming as an academic discipline, what we've learned at King's on that front, and what I see as the intellectual agenda going forward and the requirements to achieve it. So the context for this is that we've finished a strategic reassessment at King's this year. We've reflected on how the strategic environment has changed, what progress we've made, what progress the community has made, what's enabled that progress, and also identified next steps. So my presentation today builds on some of those findings. I'll start with a disclaimer that these are my personal views. I'm not presenting the views of King's as an institution. And I'll walk through some general ideas and concepts about establishing wargaming as an academic discipline, but I'll also provide a lot of examples and share some of my personal stories and some of the stories that from doing a range of activities at King's. So the meta objective is to have this be more of an interactive session, particularly with an eye to some of the students that are joining us today. So in terms of the structure of my remarks, I'll talk about three things. The first is the need for a vision. So the changed analytical needs that are dictated by the new strategic environment. The second part will be about establishing the King's Wargaming Network, why and how, and what we've learned over the last 2 years. And the third is talking about what it takes to realize wargaming, the vision of realizing wargaming as an academic discipline, the key pillars that will shape this at King's, and also the need for new thinking and the need for a new way of doing things. So some of the structural elements that would enable this thinking. Let me also elaborate a little bit on my background. to add to what Sebastian mentioned, because the this informs some of the values and types of questions that I've chosen to address in my work, and you see those in what the Wargaming Network is doing. But I also think it might be interesting to some of the students that are looking to join this field and are looking for ways to do that. So my background is in physics and international relations, and philosophy as well. I studied that as an undergraduate at Roanoke College, where I was able to bridge physics research and research on security studies into what then became my first job at the Federation of American Scientists, looking at Iran's gas centrifuges and evaluating their performance and estimating Iran's time to a bomb. So very quickly that became those findings we briefed to people at the Pentagon. Very quickly, those findings were picked up by major media, including Reuters and the Associated Press. And so the takeaway from that experience for me was that good research and good scientific research can inform urgent policy questions. This has then led to work on missile defense and disruptive technologies, and the search for new analytical methods, which I'll talk more about today. So the need for a vision, I mean, there are really two themes here. The first is intellectual humility at a strategic inflection point, and the other is this real world urgency that has created the need, new analytical questions, and the search for insights and also new tools to address them. So as I think about the origin of the Wargaming Network and my interest in this area, I go back to my time as a pre-doc at Stanford University at CSAC, and sitting on a balcony of Encina Hall, and this was in the spring of 2014, as part of a strategic stability reading group that Brad Roberts convened at the time. So it was just Brad, myself, and his research assistant, and another PhD student at Stanford at the time. And so we were discussing the changing strategic environment, in particular the emergence of major power competition, how the United States and Russia perceive the world, and whether strategic stability is a useful organizing concept. And this prompted, in a lot of the subsequent developments in the international security environment, prompted this realization that we're faced with new analytical questions. To answer these questions, we need innovation at the strategic level, technological fixes and capability fixes are no longer going to be enough. And we need different ways to innovate, because the Silicon Valley model of trial and error, and so trial and error on the battlefield against nuclear armed opponents would be too costly. So we need, we can't innovate through trial and error. We need to invest more in analysis. And so this new strategic environment is affected by new factors, political and military, and they're interacting together to produce a changed strategic logic. At the same time, there's paucity of data, so we don't have enough real world data to be able to answer some of the most consequential policy questions, like the effects, like understanding strategic deterrence, like understanding nuclear risk. But at the same time, policymakers need to make decisions about strategy and doctrine and force structure. So, the need for both, what became apparent even at that time was that we need new concepts and we need new methods. And so that's where, in looking for these new methods and analytical approaches, I started exploring wargaming. And the reason that I go back to my background in physics was that at the time I had an interest in modeling things, and I was looking at the problem of missile defense technology and how that affects strategic stability, and had this idea of building beautiful physics-based or game theoretic models that could help answer some of these questions. Now you very quickly realize that you can't model what you don't know, and so in that sense, in answering these types of questions, wargaming had potential. And so conveniently, so this was 2014, the Carnegie Corporation of New York had this call for disruptive technologies, for grant proposals on disruptive technologies and the future of deterrence. And so I thought, well, if I had $500,000, how could I best answer the research questions that I'm interested in? How can I develop a new approach that can maximize impact? And so we put in a proposal for using wargaming as part of a broader approach to understand the effects of missile defense on strategic deterrence and nuclear risk, and was one of the 5 grant recipients in this original Carnegie call. And I should say here as an aside that the Carnegie Corporation has actually done a lot to advance the development of analytical wargaming, and also the use of tabletop exercises for strategic deterrence and nuclear-related research. And this has not only enabled my work and planted the seeds for the King's Wargaming Network, but has also supported the project on nuclear gaming and work that CSIS has been doing in this area, which is important and essential, and I'll come back to that at the end of my talk. So with as part of this project, we were able to bring together a team of professional wargamers. We were able to bring together some great strategic advisors to the project, and developed, as a result, two new methods for analytical wargaming, which we applied to strategic problems. It provided an opportunity to work with some of the best people, some of the best professional wargamers in the field, but also to build new teams and galvanize the policy community, both around the insights that that this work produced, but also about the utility of wargaming. It also resulted in the creation of a rapporteur training program, which is now an analyst training program, now in its fourth year at King's, and has also helped make the case to the university that this is not only a useful but also a fundable set of activities. So you can see on the screen that this Carnegie project that I'm describing is only part of a long history of King's activities in this area. So in 2003, Professor Phil Sabin started teaching conflict simulation at King's, focusing primarily on the use of manual games for educational purposes. King's has subsequently hosted the UK the UK Connections Conference, which has now become an independent organization, and a lot of these initiatives have served as the enablers to and the motivation to establishing the King's Wargaming Network in 2018. So I'll talk about some of the early days in developing wargaming as an academic discipline on our end, and the need to create new institutions to support this. The King's Wargaming Network is an example of that. Now, I said that we established the Wargaming Network in 2018, but the idea actually started in 2017, so about a year before that. And the two key themes in establishing the network are skepticism and galvanizing a global community around key ideas. So we've, and I'll tell you a bit more about how we moved from one to the other. So skepticism, I think it was exactly 3 years ago that I walked into Phil Sabin's office and said, look, we really, we need a wargaming research center at King's. Now is the right time to do it. There's a need, and there's a policy need. There's a research need. We're uniquely positioned to plant some seeds in this area. Now, Phil, for those of you who know Phil, can imagine that he went through, the 10 things, or in this case, the 14 things of why this will never work. What I have up on the screen is actually a slide from a presentation he gave at the UK Connections Conference in 2013. It's a very useful reference point to see how far we've come in in developing wargaming since then, and how much things have changed. But it really brings home that at the time, in 2017, wargaming was not an established academic discipline. There was a lot of skepticism in whether this is a proper scholarly endeavor. And just as an example, the book that Phil authored, that is now one of the most widely read books on wargaming, on conflict simulation, at the time was not accepted as a scholarly publication. So it was not something that King's allowed Phil to count towards the rest. That was the extent to which wargaming was stigmatized at the time. So at the end of a long conversation and going through all the reasons that this is never going to work, Phil became convinced. We established that we need to then start looking for internal support at King's and starting to build further interest internally. And when we already had we're able to demonstrate the external interest and success with the Carnegie grant, but to build that internal interest within King's. And it took us about a year to do that. Now, first we brought together the founding team. You've seen the founding team in various events in various capacities. But this was Dr. Aggie Hurst, who at the time in 2018 was a temporary position at King's as lecturer. She now has a permanent position and is a senior lecturer, and has recently been promoted as a result of her contributions to wargaming scholarship. So there's we've gone a long way in having wargaming related activities be counted as good scholarship. So the founding team, Aggie Hurst, we also had James Smith, who was doing a PhD at King's at the time, and was looking at the use of wargaming in better understanding naval strategy. And Anna Nettleship, who then became the coordinator of the Wargaming Network, and subsequently started a PhD at King's using wargaming as an analytical method. But Anna was a part of the second cohort of the Rapporteur program that again originated from that initial line of Carnegie activity. So we've established the network with a view of these three long-term aims. They're in line with King's 2029 vision: educate to inspire, research to inform, and serve to shape and transform. And really capture some of the core thinking that went into shaping the vision. Now, our work over the next 2 years spanned two different sets of questions. The first, looking at understanding the broader challenges So to more deeply understand the broader problems and how wargaming is practiced and how it needs to adapt. And the subsequent effort has focused on understanding some of the ways to address these challenges. So I'll give you some examples and highlight 3 challenges. Now, the first is was an acknowledgement that there's a revived policy interest in wargaming, but really a gap between policy expectations on what wargaming can deliver and the state of the art in wargaming theory and practice. To help answer some of these broader strategic questions to inform that really stimulated this revived interest in wargaming, practices needed to become less operational and more tailored to the strategic level of war. A lot of wargaming was focused on understanding military dynamics, but was not very well suited at understanding non-military components and necessary for looking at gray zone conflicts, for example. It was not generally practiced in the manner that is would be considered rigorous and analytical from an academic standpoint. And it also, war games were usually these one-off events that failed to produce cumulative insight. Now, the second challenge I've politely put as a clash between epistemic communities, so a clash between different communities of knowledge. And what we found was that there's a significant distrust between the policy community and the professional wargaming community. And I'll give you 2 examples. And when we began designing a method for analytical wargaming, we had we tested some of the game forms with former senior Pentagon officials, and one of them, basically picked up these 7 forms that we expected them to answer, and just sort of tossed them aside and said, well, I'm not filling out 7 forms, and this is too operationally focused, and this is doing the wrong thing. And why do you trust professional wargamers to deliver something that is fit for purpose? Now, on the other hand, we had our game design team and the lead designer saying, well, why did you talk to the players? What do they know about wargame design? And ultimately, as a researcher and as the project director, you need to design an approach that is designed with the player in mind, because if players walk out of a game, which they can under the research ethics terms that we're obliged to follow, that creates then from a research perspective, you're not getting data, you're not answering research objectives, and ultimately you're not meeting the broader project objectives that you've set out to your funder. So this is really consequential. So this clash between epistemic communities, the distrust between the policy community and the professional wargaming community, and this, I would say, not only distrust but unwillingness to interact, was a real issue that was stymieing innovation. Now, the third challenge is best described with a story from one of the games that we ran at the Defense Academy, where we had on one hand a game design that worked very well at replicating real world decision making. A former Undersecretary of Defense said that this was among the best games that he participated in at replicating real world strategic decision making. The scenario was very realistic. We wanted to war game NATO's worst case and Russia's worst case. So this was what we were gaming was Russia's worst case, and it was based on interviews with Russian officials, and the scenario probably had 100 footnotes, so seemed quite credible. So on one hand, you had this good design. We had current and former U.S. and European officials participate as part of this game. They were all briefed on the topic, on the research question, on what would follow. And halfway through this gaming event, so end of day 1 out of 2 days, about a third of our players walked out of the game, and they said, well, essentially the game is too real, and our team is losing. So that brought home the urgency to both develop theories of success. So how do we, now that we've identified a problem in one of these events, well, how do we think about the developing approaches to solve that problem? So how do we win? But also the need to be able to confront as academics, as policymakers, the need to be able to confront the possibility that we can lose badly, and that potential opponents plan and prepare for these types of scenarios and these types of contingency. I mean, this was Russia's worst case that that people walked out of. And so we've been looking at identifying ways to address some of these challenges over the last 2 years. The first approach is in realization is for wargaming to become more scientific, or the need for analytical wargaming to become more scientific. And by that, I don't mean more quantitative, I mean more systematic, more public, and tailored toward producing real world knowledge. So by systematic, I mean clearly connecting premises to conclusions. These findings and processes need to be presented in a way that is auditable or subject to peer review by people that are by scholars or people that are knowledgeable in the field, and this is fundamental for if wargaming is to produce insights that inform policy. So we need to be better, produce better insights through wargaming and be better at wargaming. Now, the second solution is very well described by by Air Marshal Edward Stringer in a talk that we hosted in April 2019, in which he talked about the need to regain the habit of wargaming. And so he said that they hope to see success with innovative war games continuously implemented, supported by proper analysis and the latest technology to generate sustained advantages in these uncertain times in a rather unpredictable future. To do that, we must regain the habit of wargaming. Now, interestingly, if you look at the Rusi lecture that was just delivered last week, his office will be heading a major new UK initiative in developing and using net assessment and analytical wargaming to try to generate some of that long-term strategic thinking across UK defense. And the third solution is what I would, my shorthand for which is outthinking together. So we need to bring together different stakeholders and communities of interest. So these are, in what you see in all of our illustrations, both the professional wargaming community, the academic community, and the policy community, and galvanize them around the need to adapt wargaming to the new strategic environment. We've had quite a bit of success in doing that. So over the last 2 years, we've had over 3,000 attendees from almost 70 countries. It's impressive to see how far we've come as a community from, Phil's 14 stigmas of wargaming to the scale of global interest that we're seeing currently. So finally, I'll talk about the next steps in further developing the vision. And at King's, we're basing the development of an academic discipline on 2 pillars, research and education. On the research front, there's a need for new thinking, but then there's a need for a new way of doing things, which I'll elaborate on a little bit. And then there's a need for disseminating that new thinking to both the next generation of national security and defense analysts, but also to experienced scholars and professionals that are interested in adding wargaming to their toolkit. So on the research side of things, we're looking at the development of a fundamental research program to essentially develop the foundations of the emerging science of wargaming. So this is based on the premise that wargaming, particularly analytical wargaming, needs to become more scientific. And we're looking at a number of key areas for research, starting with ontology and epistemology. The proposition there is that we need an approach that spans or a framework that spans positivist and non-positivist approaches, and that wargaming methods that fall into these different understandings of what is knowable and what can we know and how can we know through wargaming, they need to be evaluated on their own merit within their the proper epistemological frameworks. Now, the second area is methodology. So connecting methods to research questions in order to be able to evaluate the utility of different types of wargaming approaches for different purposes, and to be able to do that in a way that's systematic. The development of new methods as well. And what is not on that list is what I would call the history and sociology of wargaming, which is about understanding how knowledge is created, how knowledge through wargaming is created. Now, the second pillar is applied research. So with that fundamental understanding of what analytical wargaming can deliver, applying that to answer both scholarly questions and also policy questions. So in terms of applied research, my proposition is that analytical wargaming methods can broadly be thought of as methods for aggregating human judgment on decisions and outcomes in different competitive contexts. And as such, they can be used to develop and test hypotheses about almost any question that pertains to human agency. And so in the social sciences, you have the main distinction between agency and structure. So to explain different kinds of phenomena. And if we think that the answer to that question, if we think that a key variable potentially in answering a research question is human agency, then wargaming, broadly defined in this way, can have applicability across the social sciences. I mean, this is in part why we're seeing such a growth of interest at King's within the School of Security Studies, but also within the School for Social Science and the Faculty of Social Science and Public Policy, because of this potential for the methods that we're developing to answer a very broad range of questions and contribute to contribute something in addition to the established methods of inquiry that are that are being taught and practiced within the school. So what I have here is just a list of some of the topics to which wargaming has been applied at King's. Some of these are ongoing projects, some of these are past projects, and I'm happy to take questions or link people up with colleagues that are working in these areas.
Thank you, Ivanka. We have a couple of questions, both sent by email and in the chat. So the first question is, what separates wargaming as a craft, something that is learned often outside the academic institutions, and something as a discipline which is learned in academia? What got us to this inflection point, and whether or not there are separate paths in realizing this vision you propose?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I mean, this is the fundamental question about the art versus wargaming is an art versus wargaming is a science. And the practice of wargaming as an art, I think, has fundamental consequences to the quality of output and the applicability of insights to generate credible insights to real world questions. Because the practice of wargaming as an art and as something that is learned by doing inevitably restricts that knowledge to a very small set of participants. And so when we talk about diversity and inclusion within wargaming, the practice of wargaming as an art, inevitably limits a broader range of people to access both the tools and engage in the practices. A discipline is something that is taught, is something that you can read that you can learn by reading, as well as by doing. It is something that is structured, open, and this is a big departure from the practice of wargaming is and the keeping of methods a trade secret that is currently the established practice. Sebastian, you said there was a second question?
Yes, one second. So one just popped up into the chat is, what role did Dunnigan's How to Make War have in the application of wargaming to policy ideation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure, absolutely. What role did Dunnigan's How to Make War have in the application of wargaming to policy ideation?
I'm sorry, I don't think I have an answer to that question.
It's okay. So we'll move on to the next one is, what do you think is the next steps the field of wargaming, either as a craft or discipline, needs to take to establish itself as a true academic discipline in the university?
Well, so this very well links into this next slide, which is a discussion on requirements. And wargaming creates challenges for academia in various ways. The first is funding, because unlike, let's say, a comparative case study or a survey experiment, running a war game requires a lot of resources. My experience and the experience of a select number of colleagues at King's that were able to raise the hundreds of thousands of dollars necessary to be able to design and run war games, that is simply not scalable. So if you come in as a PhD student and you want to use wargaming as part of your dissertation, this high cost and the lack of dedicated funding makes that almost impossible. The second requirement and challenge is what I've put there is human resources, but basically is that wargaming, to do wargaming, whether for educational or analytical purposes, you need a team. Um, and in mainstream political science and in the social sciences and certainly and to at King's, in order to be able to advance as an academic, you need single author publications. And so the academic incentives, uh, necessary for promotion limit and constrain that level of collaboration. In addition to that, you need teams of people with multiple expertise, with different kinds of expertise, and certainly in the digital environment, people with expertise in software development or technology that, in addition to war game designers and social scientists, putting that team together is quite difficult. And this leads into the third issue of broadly research ethics and copyright, intellectual property issues, standards which are currently lacking, which are necessary to create the needed level of trust and confidence among researchers to collaborate and to work together on the development and application of new methods. I've also already talked about openness and accessibility as part of the question on art versus science, but essentially we need to move away from the established model of keeping methods a trade secret, having openly published methods and methodologies that can be accessed and built upon by others. We also need to be able to combine both theory and practice. There's been too much of a focus on wargaming as a craft. What we need to be developing, and certainly what we will be, some of our efforts at King's will be in establishing the foundation of wargaming as a social science, so that it is understood and taught alongside other types of social science methods. And the diversity and inclusion question, which I think is in part answered by having that openness and accessibility, and certainly something that we're able to see in terms of the kind of broad participation that our activities generate at King's.
Ivanka, so I'm trying to keep up with all the questions that are flurrying in right now. To what extent could wargaming as a discipline be taught in middle and high schools to create a culture that is more receptive to wargaming at higher levels of education?
Well, there I would distinguish between, and this leads into the next question on the next slide, which is education through wargaming and education of wargaming. So whether you're using a war game to as a tool for experiential learning to teach students something about the world, I mean, in this case, you can do that in middle school or high school very, very effectively. There's an opportunity to also teach students something about war game design, which is fundamentally about how do we model the real world, and I think that certainly would be of interest to high school students and as well as undergraduate college students.
I think you bring a great point of the difference between teaching how to design games and using games as an educational tool. Um, the next question says, what role does storytelling have in our academic understanding of war games? For example, considering games as storytelling artifacts or mediums, or the secondary field of players creating stories based on games and play.
Right. So I mean, with that, I would go back to um, the fundamental research questions that we've identified, because the use of war games as storytelling artifacts, um, that is essentially rooted in non-positivist um, way of looking at ways of knowing about the world. So that is very much, the aim here is not to rule out and to delineate between this is what it is, this is what it isn't. It is about explaining the foundations for using war games to generate different kinds of knowledge and to create a discussion about what problems is that knowledge most usefully applied.
So the next question is on a similar note is, how much effort has King's done to measure learning effectiveness through educational wargaming? Can it be quantified, or is it a bridge too far? This sort of relates to your sort of call for analytical wargaming to be more scientific and rigorous. Does this also apply to educational gaming and how we talk and design educational games?
I think that needs to be an essential element of that supports the use of war games in the classroom. There's certainly a lot of King's, not my own work, but the work of other colleagues, focuses on being able to systematically measure learning outcomes. If we're not doing that, then we can't demonstrate to our students that that they're learning and that they're getting value for money. And there are established ways of doing that. Applying those types of methods to wargaming, I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more there.
So on a sort of similar note, if wargaming can teach critical thinking and sort of abstract analysis in the classroom, or at least aid in it, how do teachers and instructors acquire the skill to effectively use gaming in the classroom?
Right, so that's part of the educational initiative, in being able to not only, so in terms of education, we're looking at 3 different types of audiences. So one is, the next generation of experts. So, those are your undergraduate and your master's level students. But you also need to teach the researchers and teach the teachers. So that's your experienced audience. And for that, we're in the process of developing shorter courses and executive training. And then the third audience is what I would call leaders, and so civilian and military leaders who will inevitably end up with a war game report on their desk, or may want to sponsor a game, or would be invited to participate as a player in a war game, and need to better understand the values and ultimately to evaluate whether this is worth pursuing.
To follow up directly to that comment, if someone is interested, let's say an institution or individual or school is interested in taking these courses at King's, how would they coordinate that with your program?
Well, so I appreciate interest in that regard. If people are, please get in touch with me. And I should also add that we've recently hired Dr. David Banks, who is a lecturer in wargaming at King's, who is also the academic director of the Wargaming Network, and so David will be leading a lot of these educational initiatives, particularly with regard to developing the next generation of scholars. So we're there's a process underway at King's to redesign the wargaming curriculum, and we're happy to talk to you more about that, and if you're also interested in taking these future courses that will become available, please get in touch as well.
So along that note, I have a question that says, so what are some of the plans or initiatives that is on the horizon for the King's Wargaming Network and your program at the college?
So as part of this strategic reassessment and realizing the need that we can no longer continue to, at least the Wargaming Network can no longer effectively execute in its convening function. A lot of the activities are focused on basically think and write. And so you'll be expecting to see a lot of publications from King's students and staff over the next 6 to 12 months. It's an excellent opportunity to take the time to write down the lessons learned and write down the methodologies that we've been developing. So that's one. We have launched our public lecture series, focusing on these fundamental research topics. That is an acknowledgement that we've come a long way as a community over the last 2 years, and so that public lecture series aims to showcase what we think is some of the most transformational and groundbreaking new research that is coming out of the scholarly community. We're also planning an academic workshop in the spring, and we have a continued lineup of wargaming activities and as part of research projects. And if you get on our mailing list, there'll be opportunities to participate in some of these events as well.
Thank you, Ivanka. So this one, for the person who entered this comment / question, I'm going to shorten it for a little bit for brevity. Someone who works in the DoD, in reference to your story about the 7 questionnaires and the reaction that it got from senior leaders and the players, they said that the point here ultimately is that the approach taken by academics / research wargaming communities, particularly those funded by the defense establishment, need to be tailored to the ways that the defense establishment actually works or consumes information. So in this regard, how can the field of wargaming evolve its approaches to be more receptive to its key stakeholders, players, and consumers?
Well, I would point that person to design thinking as an approach, and Wong has done some work in this area, but I mean, ultimately, it's the design community has thought a lot about how to systematically design something with the player in mind, and it basically boils down to ask people early and often what they think and involve them in the design process. So this is moving away from the artist, the war game designer as the center of the process, into the player as the central object of design. That also has some interesting implications for for analysis, but also for policy impact, because you no longer have the researcher or at the center of the analytical process. You now have the policymaker at the center of that. So instead of having a policymaker, ask a question, somebody takes the question, goes into the basement and produces an answer in 2 weeks or 2 months. Now you have that policymaker directly involved in the process, and they're learning something from that activity, and they will be learning something from a very narrow view of being part of the red team or the blue team. And we've certainly seen that with games that we've run at King's, that you've had these senior people sit on a panel and express very different views and have conflicting ideas of what even happened in a game, let alone the insights that are derived. So that just goes back to the need for a scientific approach and the need for then that independent researcher or analyst that can present insights that are well supported by evidence. And so what is evidence in a game? How can you demonstrate that you're collecting the right types of data to answer that research question? How do you present that to different audiences? I think where we have some established standards in other areas of the social sciences, we just need to be better at applying that to wargaming.
So on that note, you mentioned earlier that wargaming methods and techniques shouldn't be treated as trade secrets and more scientific in the sense of sharing this knowledge and being more transparent. What are other ways that professional analytical wargaming can become more transparent and scientific in concrete ways?
Publish. That's really all there is to it. And have more of these kinds of open exchanges, which Sebastian, you're hosting, certainly King's is hosting, but also a number of other institutions. And it's that being able to have conflicting ideas in a public setting, that is ultimately what contributes to the advancement of knowledge, and that will produce a progressive academic discipline of wargaming.
So circling back to one of your slides that says, and one of the stories that about you mentioning to Phil that you guys that this was the right time for King's to set up your program on wargaming. How did you garner internal support within your university to get the changes that you that the program needed to get done? For instance, changing the mentality around publications in Phil's book and others, and how you treat research through wargaming. How did you guys go about that?
Well, so the first point of reference is the ability to generate a lot of external funding to support wargaming related research. The policy impact that had, which was demonstrable, and the fact that we very deliberately engaged a wide range of King's experts, but also internally within the university, but also externally in the testing and the design of these games. So we had about, I would say, 70 people engaged in the development and testing of these of the first strategic analytical method that we developed in as part of that Carnegie initiative. So that meant that a lot of people were, quite intentionally already exposed to wargaming as part of, either as players or helping some piece of the development. The person that was particularly instrumental um, helping us achieve that level of support was Professor Wim Bowen, who was the head of the School of Security Studies at King's, and was the grant holder of that initial Carnegie grant, and has served as a mentor, certainly to me personally, but has also been involved in a lot of the research. So at that point, we were able to make the case, and to him, to others in the university, that not only is this worth pursuing as an institution, but it's also worth funding. And so we received 2 grants, one out of a discretionary budget within the School of Security Studies, but another pot of money from the Faculty of Social Sciences and Public Policy to support basically a pilot initiative at King's. And so subsequently, we've been able to demonstrate impact and continued investment, and you can see that through the promotion of Dr. Hurst. You can see that through the hiring of Dr. Banks, who I believe is the first person to have at a civilian university to have the title Wargaming, lecturer in Wargaming. So we've come a long way in being able to secure that institutional support.
So along that note, is King's working with mega gang groups in the UK that are currently ongoing in capturing lessons learned from design, practice, and outcomes?
No, we're not. But if you're interested we'll be interested in hearing more about that.
So I'm actually going to convert a comment into a question. Apologies to whoever's comment this is. It says, the academic discipline of wargaming is by necessity different from the method of practice of wargaming in support of decision makers. This is true for all disciplines with a practical component. See, for example, the discipline of statistics, where PhDs in statistics are pursuing rigorous understanding of statistical models and creating new ones, while the application of statistics is designed to solve real practical problems. In this regard, do you see a sort of continuing bifurcation between the academic discipline of wargaming as it grows and the method of practice in the wargaming in support of decision makers? If so, how can we create more collaboration and synergy between these two versus friction?
I don't see those as separate at all. Because we need to be looking at the history and sociology of wargaming, which aims to describe established practices, while also looking at some of the more fundamental underpinnings behind them. And so I would distinguish between a descriptive approach, which is, here is how wargaming is done. And you can elicit, for example, typologies or ways of thinking about wargaming systematically from a review of and an understanding of how wargaming is actually being practiced. Or you can have a different approach, which is a normative one, to say, here is how wargaming ought to be practiced, and this is to be a good analytical war game needs to fall within the following categories and be able to demonstrate the following things. And you have that with even with statistics, you have a good way to validate whether the application of a statistical method is is defensible.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. I just realized I just said the question on mute. You would think after months of Zoom, I would have mastered this. Switching gears a little bit, what advice would you give to a student who wants to break into the professional wargaming field, given that it is so guild and sort of niche based in terms of learning the skill of wargaming?
Well, other than doing an MA at King's or at Georgetown, I think the best thing to do is to either enroll in a course of study at one of the universities that are offering wargaming classes, or look for a research assistant or associate positions or internships at some of the think tanks in Washington and other places that are increasingly using war games. So, places like CNA, like CSIS, like Russia, IISS. Most think tanks now are looking at either doing some kind of tabletop exercising or are looking at different kinds of wargaming tools. So there's a way to become exposed to some of that. Additionally, there's going to be a lot of on-the-job training with junior positions in policy departments as the interest in wargaming across government grows. And I don't think that's just going to be defense.
So the wargaming community here in the States can be very sort of self-centric in the sense that we often talk about ourselves and talk among ourselves. So looking at a more global approach, as wargaming is, a global tool, what is the wargaming landscape and trends out in the UK and Europe that you've sort of realized or excited about?
So there's a significantly revived interest in wargaming in the UK policy community. So we see that through the establishment of a Wargaming Center for Excellence within DSTL, which now leads a lot of the wargaming across different departments in Defense Department, within different parts of the UK MOD. In addition to that, there's a renewed or a new effort to use wargaming for educational and training purposes within the military. I'd point you to UK Fight Club, and they've got a major initiative underway in creating a network of institutions ranging from startups and companies and established companies to universities, think tanks, and to develop more flexible soldiers and military leaders as well. There's also, as I mentioned, new thinking on using analytical wargaming for strategic analysis. There's an initiative now currently underway to look at the options for that that we're also thinking about. So there's, in short, wargaming is seen as the new way to innovate, and that creates both opportunities but also dangers.
So I have a short question, which is, does King's offer a course on cyber wargaming? This is from someone from Oxford who's interested in collaborating if there is opportunity there.
Well, so we have our program for training analysts in strategic analytical wargaming, and that is topic agnostic, meaning it can be applied to a range of strategic level questions and problems. We don't offer a course specifically looking at cyber wargaming. You would, the Military Operations Research Society offered a short course on that. But that had some constraints on who can, on nationality in terms of who can participate.
So the next question is a bit long, so bear with me. The discussion here makes me consider that we are aggregating all types of war games together in a broad category. Yet the potential applications of war games vary widely. Don't we have to categorize potential applications better first? And if so, what are your thoughts on how to divide the wider field into subcategories? For instance, training and education, political outcomes, and others. Is this kind of categorization helpful if we are to develop guidelines and shared approaches to design and implementation of war games? If you need me to repeat any portion of that, just let me know. I know it's a bit long.
This is exactly what we're aiming to do with this broader fundamental research program. This is, looking for these types of categorization or typologies or ways of systematically linking different methods to purposes. That is what we need. That more thinking needs to be done on that, and certainly more published and peer-reviewed thinking needs to be done on this topic.
So on that note, we have an easier question. So one of the people wanted to ask, what is one of your favorite games or war games that you like to play?
Well, the answer to that is I don't really like playing games. I think there's a lot of games and war games are very useful for certain purposes, but my interest in wargaming is is in terms of advancing that analytical and educational purpose as opposed to engaging in games for fun. Which is why I should say David Banks and I, that's why we make a great team, because David is an avid hobby wargamer. I mean, he's a well-established scholar, but he's also an avid hobby wargamer. So he comes, what he also brings to the team is a true passion for wargaming. My passion is in solving, consequential strategic problems and developing the best tools to do that.
David is great, and we had many discussions about games and game design. So switching back to King's, is someone in the comment mentioned that King's had a lot of money and funding sort of injected into his naval wargaming program at King's. And I, following you guys on Twitter and social media, see all the cool work you guys are doing in terms of naval wargaming as well. Could you elaborate on some of the work you guys are doing in that field?
Well, so the naval wargaming work is led by James Smith, and is part of the PhD work that he's been doing also as a fellow at in the Naval War College. So that's where some of the support for his work in that area has been. We will be doing a lot more in that area with a Corbett 100 project that James is directing, which celebrates the history of naval strategy, and will use war games in different ways, as well as further developing some of the more analytical applications. But I'd suggest getting in touch with James Smith for more details about that.
So on that note, if people want to follow up with you with questions or follow-ups, how can they reach you, Ivanka?
So I have my email, my personal email at King's for general questions on events and activities. Please email wargaming@kcl.ac.uk.
And also, if you want to follow her on social media, she is also on Twitter. I want to pause for a second as people get a chance to put in any last minute questions. And then, so I will ask you one final question is, what is something you're excited about for the next year? Either professionally or personally. We like to end on a positive note.
Well, what I find very, very exciting is the ability to scale and make more rigorous analytical wargaming. And I think we're now also confronted with the need to be able to do wargaming remotely and in a digital environment. And I think that's going to significantly accelerate and potentially revolutionize the way that wargaming is being conducted. We certainly have some new developments in that area that I'm not ready to share at this moment, but expect something new from us soon, and looking at how technology can be leveraged to support some of the things that I've identified, and I know that there's a number of initiatives also underway by other colleagues and people both in academia and in industry as well. So I think I'm personally excited by what, the combination of wargaming as an emerging science, and the promise of that these new digital analytical methods bring to deliver new insights.
So on that note, I would like to thank you on behalf of all of the Georgetown University Wargaming Society, and thank you for a great presentation.